The rain was coming down sideways on a narrow back street in Philadelphia. Marcus gripped the worn leather strap of his messenger bag as if it might anchor him to the moment. He wasn't supposed to be here, not in this part of the city, not with his heart doing this erratic tap dance inside his chest. "Tell me the fifth word," the man had said. Now that voice echoed in his skull, distorted by time and fear. Marcus ducked beneath a crumbling awning, soaked to the bone, staring at the small white envelope in his hand. The paper was thick and warm from his pocket, but it shook between his fingers like it had a life of its own. Inside were 5 words, handwritten, each with the deliberate pressure of someone who believed in ink over anything digital, someone who believed in meaning more than mechanics. He had already read the first 4: believe, give, silence, open. But he hadn't dared to read the 5th, not yet. Just 24 hours ago, Marcus had been sitting in a sleek conference room on the 29th floor of a midtown Manhattan high-rise, giving a pitch he didn't believe in for a product he didn't use. The client had smiled, but Marcus had felt hollow. It wasn't the first time, it wouldn't be the last unless something changed. And then there was the letter. It came in a padded envelope with no return address, slipped beneath his apartment door while he was in the shower. No postage, no sound, just there, like a thought that had suddenly become real. On the back of the envelope was a name he hadn't heard in nearly 20 years. Rupert Sheldrake, not the biologist, not the theorist. Not the man who'd stirred up half of academia with talk of morphic resonance. This Rupert was someone else, someone Marcus knew from a church basement in North Carolina, 2006, when they were both lost boys trying to learn how to pray in silence, trying to understand what it meant to ask God for direction and not hear anything back. Until one day, Rupert said he had heard something. 5 words. Clear as a bell. He told Marcus then, "You won't understand them now, but one day you'll need them, all 5. Marcus had laughed, walked away, never looked back until today. He finally tore the envelope open, shaking off the rain, and pulled out the heavy card inside. There they were. 5 words, all caps, black ink. Believe, give, silence, open. But the 5th line wasn't a word. It was a mirror, literally, a tiny strip of reflective tape glued to the card, catching Marcus's stunned expression. He whispered to no one, "What the hell does that mean?" That's when the phone rang, an unknown number, no caller ID. But he knew. He knew before he answered. "Marcus," said the voice, low and steady. "You saw it?" He couldn't speak. "You don't get to know the 5th word yet," Rupert said. "Not until you're ready to use it." Then the line went dead. Marcus didn't go home that night. Instead, he checked into a cheap motel near the train station where the curtains smelled like old tobacco and the sheets felt damp even though they were clean. He sat on the edge of the bed, the card with the 5 words or 4 words and a mirror on the nightstand, staring at it like it might blink. What did Rupert mean, "You're not ready"? He hadn't heard from the guy in almost 2 decades, and yet hearing his voice again had done something strange to Marcus. It wasn't just nostalgia, it was something deeper. Like some part of him that had been asleep for years had opened one eye and started watching again. He tried to sleep, but his mind kept replaying that mirror, that 5th blank. At 3:11 a.m., he sat up with a start. The room was cold and silent, but he had the clear sense that someone was watching him. He flicked on the bedside lamp. Nothing, just shadows and cracked paint. Then came the knock. 3 soft taps on the door. He didn't move. The knocking came again, quieter, slower. Against his better judgment, Marcus crossed the room and looked through the peephole. A man in a brown overcoat stood in the hallway, facing the door. No umbrella, no luggage. Just standing there as if he had been waiting for Marcus specifically. He had a deep scar running down the right side of his face, from the temple to the jawline. His eyes were calm, cold, but not unkind. Marcus hesitated, then opened the door just a few inches, the chain lock still in place. "Can I help you?" The man tilted his head. "You received the words." Marcus didn't reply. "I'm here for your answer," the man said. What answer? The fifth word, he said. Marcus's grip tightened on the doorframe. I don't know what it is. The man smiled faintly. That's not true. Marcus shook his head. There's nothing written, just a mirror. That's the answer. Marcus blinked. What? The man leaned in slightly. The word is who you are when no one's looking. The word is what you do when there's nothing left to prove. And then he turned and walked away, his footsteps slow and deliberate down the hallway, vanishing into the stairwell without another word. Marcus didn't sleep. At sunrise, he went back to the envelope. He stared into the tiny mirror again, but this time he didn't look away. He thought of everything he'd built, his job, his reputation, his curated image, and suddenly it all felt like scaffolding built around something hollow. The word is you, he heard the man's voice again. But that wasn't enough. He needed more. He picked up his phone, went to contacts, and searched one name. Rupert Sheldrake. No number. Just a single address in Baltimore, last updated 11 years ago. Marcus stared at it. He didn't pack much, just the card, a change of clothes, and a notebook. He was going to Baltimore. The bus ride to Baltimore was 4 hours of gray sky and restless silence. Marcus sat by the window, notebook in his lap, flipping through pages filled with old prayers and abandoned thoughts, leftovers from a version of himself he didn't recognize anymore. The address led him to a quiet neighborhood lined with brick row houses and iron railings. The number on the mailbox was faded, but it matched. He stood at the top of the steps, breathing in the cold air, before knocking 3 times. No answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He reached for the knob. It turned easily. Inside, the air was stale, heavy with dust and the faint scent of incense long burned out. It wasn't a house anymore. It felt more like a memory, abandoned but echoing. The furniture was minimal, a couch, a small table, and a bookshelf full of worn titles. But what caught his eye was the door beneath the stairs. It was half open, revealing a narrow descent into darkness. He knew that door. 18 years ago, this basement had been their refuge. Back then, Rupert had rented the place from an old woman who lived upstairs. They'd meet every Thursday night. No phones, no music, just 2 folding chairs, a candle, and silence. Marcus descended now, step by creaking step, until he reached the bottom. Everything was exactly as he remembered. Same stone walls, same cement floor. And in the center, the 2 metal chairs still facing each other. One was empty, the other held a small wooden box. Marcus sat slowly, his breath fogged in the cold. He reached for the box and opened it. Inside, a cassette recorder, a pair of headphones, and a note in Rupert's sharp handwriting. Press play. He did. A soft hiss. Then Rupert's voice, older, slower. If you've made it here, you're not just curious, you're hungry. Good, because this isn't about magic words or secret codes. It's about remembrance. 5 words, yes, but they're not spells. They're mirrors, maps. And the 5th one is the hardest, because it's not a word you find, it's one you become. The tape clicked, then silence. Marcus sat there, staring at the recorder. He suddenly remembered a night from long ago. Rupert had asked him, if everything you are was stripped away, job, money, name, what would be left? Back then, Marcus had answered too quickly. Now, he wasn't sure he had an answer at all. He took out his notebook and wrote the 4 words again, believe, give, silence, open. Then below them, he left the 5th line blank, for now. Before he left the basement, he picked up the recorder and the box. Something told him this wasn't the end. It was the beginning. As he stepped into the light, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. A message. The next word will cost you. Marcus stared at the message on his phone until the screen dimmed and went black. The next word will cost you. He didn't know who sent it. But deep down, he already understood what it meant. These weren't just words, they were sacrifices. He left the row house and walked until his legs ached, trying to process it all. The streets of Baltimore buzzed around him, mothers calling to kids, horns blaring. a dog barking behind a gate. The city moved like life always did, loud, chaotic, indifferent. But inside him, everything had gone quiet. He found a small cafe and ordered black coffee, though he didn't drink it. He opened his notebook again, staring at the blank fifth line. How many things had he believed in over the years? How much had he given? When had he ever truly been silent? Had he ever really opened? All of it felt shallow now. Or worse, performed. He didn't hear the woman sit down across from him until she spoke. You look like someone who just read a truth they didn't want to believe. Marcus looked up, startled. She was older, with silver hair pulled into a braid and clear eyes that seemed to see too much. She wore no makeup. Her hands were ink-stained, like she'd been writing. Do I know you? He asked cautiously. No, she said, but I know that card. The 5 words. Rupert's test. Marcus tensed. Who are you? A friend or an enemy, depending on how you answer the next question. She leaned forward. What are you willing to lose to find the 5th word? He stared at her, not knowing whether to laugh or run. She waited, calm, patient. Finally, Marcus whispered, everything. She nodded. Then you're closer than most. From her coat, she pulled a folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. Burn this, she said, but read it first, and know this. Once you read it, you can't go back. She stood and walked out, just like that. No name, no number, gone. Marcus hesitated, then unfolded the paper. Inside, one word was written in the same black ink as the card, surrender. The 5th word. His chest tightened. Was this it? Was this the thing Rupert said he wouldn't be ready for? It wasn't a beautiful word. It wasn't triumphant. It was terrifying. Because surrender meant letting go. Of image, control, certainty. It meant everything he'd built might need to fall apart. He stared at the page for a long time before walking outside, finding an alley, and lighting the edge of the paper with a match from the cafe counter. The word burned slow, refusing to disappear too quickly. When it was ash, he turned on his phone. Another message had already arrived. Now you have to use it. Marcus sat on a park bench just outside the cafe, the wind picking up around him, carrying the last hints of burned paper into the grey sky. Surrender. He whispered the word to himself, and for the first time, it didn't feel like failure. It felt like weight, like something real. He opened his notebook and wrote it down under the other 4. For the first time, the list looked complete. Believe, give, silence, open, surrender. His phone buzzed again. Another message, this time with an address. No explanation, just numbers and a street. 1048 Howard Street, 4 p.m. Alone, no name. But Marcus didn't hesitate. The building at 1048 Howard looked abandoned. 4 stories of cracked brick and graffiti. The front door hung off its hinges. Marcus stepped inside, his footsteps echoing on broken tile. The air smelled of rust and mildew. A single voice came from above. 2nd floor. It was Rupert. Marcus climbed carefully, the stairs groaning under his weight. On the 2nd floor, light poured through a missing window, casting a beam across the dust. Rupert stood there. Older, thinner, eyes deeper set than Marcus remembered, but it was him. You made it, Rupert said. Marcus nodded. Was I supposed to? Rupert smiled faintly. Most don't. They stood in silence. The last time they'd been face to face, they were both boys. Now they stood like men who'd each tasted the price of pretending. You found the word, Rupert said. Did it hurt? Marcus laughed quietly. Yeah, good. Rupert walked over to an old folding chair and sat. Now tell me what you're ready to lose. Marcus hesitated. I thought surrender was the end. It's the beginning, Rupert said. Surrender isn't defeat. It's the moment you stop bargaining and start trusting. Marcus sat across from him. I don't even know who I am without the chase. Without proving something. Rupert leaned forward. That's because everything you built was built without surrender. Without that word, the others are hollow. Belief becomes ego. Giving turns into manipulation. Silence becomes avoidance. Openness becomes a performance. Marcus felt something break open in his chest. What do I do now? Rupert stood and walked to a small box in the corner. He pulled out a blank envelope and handed it to Marcus. This is yours now. Give it to someone when they're ready, but only when they've lost enough to listen. Marcus held the envelope. It was the same kind that had arrived at his door. Rupert looked at him. You're not here to be saved, Marcus. You're here to remember. A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Rupert said, There's nothing more I can teach you. The rest is life. Marcus stood. No tears, just clarity. He stepped into the hallway, envelope in hand. The afternoon light outside was brighter now, cutting through the grime, illuminating the stairwell like a path. One step at a time, he walked toward whatever was next. 6 months later, Marcus stood outside a quiet library in Asheville, North Carolina. Early spring wind tugged at the collar of his coat as he watched people drift in and out, each carrying books, conversations, small lives in motion. In his hand was the envelope Rupert had given him, still sealed, still waiting. He had left his job 2 months ago. No press release, no big farewell. Just a quiet resignation and a final line in his notebook, I surrender. Since then, Marcus had been teaching adult writing workshops at a local community center. He lived in a smaller apartment now, walked more, prayed differently. Less like asking, more like listening. Most days he still wrestled with doubt, but it no longer defined him. It simply reminded him that he was still in process, still becoming. Inside the library, his Tuesday group was already gathering. 6 students, different ages, different stories. All of them carried silence in their eyes the way he once had. He stepped inside, greeted them, and began the session. Today's prompt was simple. Right about the moment everything changed. He moved from table to table, offering guidance, listening to pauses more than sentences. One young woman, 20, maybe 21, sat alone near the window. She hadn't written a word. Marcus knelt beside her. Stuck? He asked gently. She nodded. I don't know how to begin. He saw something familiar in her eyes. That same weight he'd carried, that quiet desperation to be understood without asking too much. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the envelope. For a moment he hesitated. Then he placed it gently on the table. Open this when you're ready, he said. Not before. She looked at it confused. What is it? Marcus smiled. 5 words that found me when I was lost. Maybe they'll find you too. He didn't wait for her reaction. He simply walked away and let the silence hold. Later that night, Marcus sat on his porch as rain whispered over the rooftops. He opened his notebook and wrote, The 5th word was never missing. I just wasn't ready to see myself in it. He thought of Rupert, the church basement, the cold light in the abandoned building in Baltimore. He didn't know where Rupert was now, or if he'd ever see him again, but he no longer needed answers from him. The words had done their work. Believe, give, silence, open, surrender. 5 steps, 5 mirrors, 5 choices. Each one had cost him something, certainty, pride, control, but had returned something deeper, peace, presence, and a life that felt true. He closed the notebook and looked out at the quiet street. Somewhere in this town, a young woman held an envelope, and maybe, just maybe, it would break her open the same way it had broken him. And maybe that was the point, not to teach, not to fix, but to pass it on.